first candidate is Ben. I've always seen your names referred to as Ben. I guess it's Benjamin, right?
Yeah.
Benjamin Bederson, who will be giving our first talk. Thank you very much.
So this is an exciting time to be in computer science. There's an incredible resurgence in entrepreneurial activity, in consumer interest, in business applications, and computing has become central to research across campus, and we're in this third historical surge in undergraduate majors in our department now with over 1,000 enrolled majors. So I'm pretty excited because I think we really have the potential to becoming the thought leader for information and computing on campus and broadly and more broadly. But in order to get there, we need to do a lot of things. We're pretty good, but we can do better. One of the things that I think is sort of a high-level goal to look for is our ranking. As you probably know, their U.S. News and World Report has this ranking, and I would love to see us in the top 10 in the next 5 years. But that's been a goal for mine, or a hope of mine for a while. But if we look, I'm afraid we actually are going away from that goal. I've gone through with some effort, crawled backwards in time, and found our rankings over the last 15 years. And while we've had a high of 11, we're now tied for 14th place. These rankings are tricky. First of all, they are not an end. They're a means to an end. I don't really care about the rankings themselves. What I really care about is our primary missions of research and education. But the rankings are important for a few reasons. First of all, the rankings are partly enabling for us to do our primary missions, because the way we do great research and education is by having fantastic people here. And one of the many ways, admittedly many ways, that people choose to come here is through reputation. And this is a kind of a holistic view of what our reputation is. And the reality is that computer science is a very, and in fact, increasingly competitive field, I would argue. I know sometimes you look at some big thing like the rankings and say, well, first of all, what does it mean and how could we possibly improve it? Because it is not an objective measure. It does not count our papers. It does not count our citations. In fact, it's too bad because we would probably do better if they did, because we actually are quite effective in our objective metrics. But this is really a popularity contest. You know, the rankings are essentially the result of a bunch of senior faculty opining about all the computer science departments. And so this means that this is based not only on the reality of what we do, but on people's perception of what we do. And that perception is based on reality, but it also includes their understanding of who we are, on who they know, on how we communicate, how we hold ourselves, how they see us on the news, where our graduate students are placed, what kind of projects we're working on, how much excitement there is, all these kinds of things. There's also a sense, I've heard that it's very hard to influence these things, and also it doesn't change that much. In fact, it's a little hard to tell from this picture, but a lot of universities don't change very much. But so it's perhaps more instructive to look at those that do. There are only a few, that have really significantly fallen in the rankings. Brown, Rice, and Yale have pretty much fallen off the map. So I don't want to spend too much time on them. In fact, that's sort of good because that enables somebody else to rise. And the places that rise, I think, are the really interesting ones. We know who the top ones are. We know who the ones right above us are. But interestingly, Georgia Tech, Michigan, and UCSD are really the only ones that have done significant rises. I've sort of had the sense, and I've heard that University of Washington is something really to shoot for, but they've been absolutely stable at position 7 or 8 for this entire time period. And so we have to think, what is it that we need to do if we want to go with these? It's a tough one because we are absolutely top-notch people. We're doing absolutely excellent research. I know people are very committed to our undergraduate and graduate education, and so how could we possibly do more? And the answer is, it's not so much that of course, you always want to do better, right? We always want to hire people just a little bit better than average. But we need to not only do our individual research, our individual efforts, our group and lab efforts, which is fundamental, that's important, but we also need to, I think, do a better job at defining ourselves as a department and communicating who we are and think about what our broader goals are. So I think we also have to look at, we can look at everything, including how we manage our department. And I think it's important that we really come together and not shy away from hard problems. I think we do a lot of, I'll call them local optimizations. And I know nobody feels like they have time to do a big effort, but just like Amitabh did with the website, I think it actually is possible to do big efforts and look at things broadly if we make that commitment. So I just want to dive into a few areas and talk about things that we could look into more broadly. Let me start with undergraduate education for a moment. So there's actually been a lot of stuff in the news recently, but in the New York Times last week there was an article by Larry Summers, the former Harvard president, who said, quote, "College campuses are seen as the source for the newest thinking and for the generation of new ideas as society's cutting edge. Yet undergraduate education changes remarkably little over time." And I think if you look at our undergraduate program, while it's certainly changed and improved, it is, at a high level, looks pretty similar to at least the way it was when I arrived here in 1998. I think we can't be afraid of making big changes. And it's not only that we can't be afraid. If we look at a lot of the peer institutions and our competitive institutions that are doing better and rising, they are making big changes. And so I want to look at some of those things. First of all, we need to, I want to start by thanking all of the people who are really directly involved in our undergraduate education, because I don't want to by any means say that we're not putting a lot of energy in. We are. But we need to think more broadly. I know that there are, especially in the undergrad office, a lot of communications with our stakeholders, our students, and the industry, and our parents. But I think that can be done more reflectively as a way to figure out what it is that we really need to support. I think in doing that, we can develop our own goals for what it is that we really want to accomplish with our education. You know, it's kind of hard to define. These are a bit nebulous, but I was trying to think of what would it mean for me if we were successful. These are not metrics, but these are sort of lofty goals. I think that students should believe, they should feel confident they're getting the best education in the world. I think our faculty should feel like they own undergraduate education. That is, I think the success of our department should ride on the success of our education. We are, right, a university with over 1,000 undergraduate majors. That needs to be absolutely fundamental to what we do. And I hope that the outside world looks at us, to computer science, as leaders in computer science education. To get there, we've got to do a lot of things. We might start like we do any research project. Look at the literature, right? What do we know? What has the literature shown to us about education? And about, look at our peers. Look at a competitive landscape. What are our peers doing? And if you look, you'll find that they're doing a lot of different things. Let's look at a couple of them. So Georgia Tech is perhaps the most innovative, where about 5 years ago they revamped their undergraduate program and organized it around threads, which they describe as, quote, threads being about contextualized education. Students must understand the relevance and see the impact of what they're learning while they are learning it. So what does that mean? Well, while the core of computer science, of course, includes all the things that we teach, at least including things like databases and operating systems and programming languages and AI and HCI, right? All of these kinds of things. But Georgia Tech presents it not based on those things, but based on devices, intelligence, modeling and simulation, platforms, information internetworks, media, people, theory, right? When you dive down, they still teach a lot of this. I mean, they still teach all of those same technical things, but they structure it very differently, and they enable students to access it in a way that might make more sense for them and for a wider range of interests, not people that are only interested in computing for its own sake. And if it was only Georgia Tech, maybe we would say, okay, well, they're an oddball, except, of course, they've been doing very well. But they're not the only ones. Cornell, as I'm sure you know, was in the news last month because they raised $350 million plus a $100 million commitment from New York City to start a new campus in New York, where they are going to organize their whole program around hubs. And look at the names of these hubs: mobile, social interaction, intelligent, trustworthy services, technologies for a healthier life, smart technologies for the built environment. It doesn't mean they're not doing the same deep computer science that they've always done and that we're doing. But they're thinking about how to communicate that and how to attract people in a very different way. And in fact, if you look at Stanford's undergraduate program, even they have a core, small number of courses. I think it's 4 or 5 courses that everyone must take. and then application areas. And they have 9 areas that undergraduates can choose from. So there's much more diversity, but with a well-defined core. Could we define a well-defined core? Because I know it'll happen. The 50 or so people in this room will all say, that's absolutely great as long as it includes my course. So we're going to get to how to deal with that. That's one of the hard problems that we can't shy away from. We have to just dive right into it. We have to consider our delivery of education. We have to consider how we can use technology in innovative ways. There has been this thing here that I just mentioned. But of course, we've also seen Stanford's online courses last year, which has gotten a tremendous amount of visibility. MIT has jumped right in before they've even done anything. They've made a commitment to do MITx, right? But it's not quite available yet because they want to be in the game. And in fact, in the last week, in addition to the New York Times article, there was one in the Washington Post, College for Nothing or Next to Nothing, and a feature story on NPR. And then Stanford's Sebastian Thrun decided it was so successful, we talked about him by email at least, he's going off to start in Udacity, his own company. So at the very least, we need to be aware of these trends, because I would argue that computer science education, as much as any university education, is ripe for disruption. We love to disrupt other industries, but I'd hate to have our head in the sand when our industry is getting disrupted. I think at the very least it requires some deep thought about what's going on and how we're going to respond. We also can consider a broader range of other kinds of educational activities. We do many of them, but there are many others we could do. Last year, some of you know that I ran a mobile programming contest on campus, which included a lot of computer science students, but also students from just about every college on campus. I'm set up to do it again next year, planning with Adam Porter and John Froelich. I'm really excited, and this time it's going to be even bigger. We're partnering with MTech and Dingman Center for Entrepreneurship. Right? There are a lot of ways that we can do things that meet our core mission that also look more broadly. So thinking about undergraduate education, I think we have to think about our faculty. This is a tough one, but if you go look again at some of these competitive peer institutions, you will find that they have tenure track and tenured faculty whose research is about computer science education. And that's something maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't have here, but we absolutely should have a discussion about whether we want to pursue that. And if you look on campus, it happens elsewhere. I mean, a lot of other units on campus. Physics and math at the University of Maryland have a long history of having faculty with joint appointments in education that do research in the education of those fields. And we need to consider our students. One of the big challenges all of computer science has is how to engage a broad and diverse student body with, I think, a special consideration for women. This is not only a matter of equity, but it's also a matter of what makes us all stronger, what makes the field stronger. I'm sure many of you have read the well-known book, Unlocking the Clubhouse, that came out about 10 years ago, that described significant research efforts at CMU. And if you haven't, it's really inspiring. I think it's well worth reading, because they had some incredible results. First of all, they spent a lot of time looking at the broader issues of what it takes to engage women in undergraduate computing. And then they worked really hard at doing everything they could within the program to bring in women and then support them. And the thing that was kind of shocking is what happened to their undergraduate enrollment when they started this research in 1995 with 7% enrollment to when it finished in 2000 with 42% enrollment. Right? Pretty remarkable. We are currently at 14% here today, which went up for around 5%, which is great, and that's due to a lot of personal commitments, but not due to what I would argue is a strategic departmental-wide effort. And there are a lot of other important metrics that you can consider, certainly at least including how many students graduate, how many people stay in the program. So the only data I have is that in this at CMU, the number of women that were in the program after 2 years went up from the 40s to in the 90s percent. Finally, I'll just stop this education business part by saying that we have to think hard, and I recognize this is hard, about how we value people's efforts. What do we consider in advancement and promotion and advancement? We like to see good education. We all, I know as a department we value it, but I think we need to think harder about how we demonstrate that value and how we consider it. Because in the end, I think you are what you measure. Let me just talk briefly about graduate education. Graduate education is different in many ways. I think great graduate education is based on great research, which we do. So in some ways I have less to say. I think there are still things to do. There are some easy things, many of which we do, but we could do better, such as better support for students, especially for first and second year students getting connected to research groups and to faculty. We could do things as simple as having publications of which groups have open meetings and lunches and reading seminars. We could have more, I think, reading seminars are all called non-traditional educational opportunities, not just our courses and our research. And we can consider the hard things. And I know this comes and goes as something we should talk about but don't ever really quite get to, which is our field committees and the way we structure our faculty's research groups. It makes sense to some extent, but I would say that it's anchored in the past. Right? I know at the very least the field committee structure hasn't changed in the 15 years I've been here, and I think that the structure of who our faculty have changed to some extent. So I think at the very least it can be freshened, and I think we should consider whether we should change it even more. All right. Let me switch gears and talk about department leadership. Leadership is another tricky one because you're all the best at what you do. Why do you need a leader? Right? One of the great things about faculty is each faculty member is their own leader, or maybe their group has a small leadership. So the answer is because a leader's job is not to tell you how to do your research. I couldn't possibly do that. I wouldn't want to do that. A leader's job is to bring people together to develop a communal sense of values, to figure out what it is that we think is important as a department. To do all kinds of things like management and budgetary stuff and fundraising and supporting faculty and getting them promoted. And then going back to those goals that we've collectively defined and pushing everybody just a little bit harder than they would like to be pushed to help us reach those goals. So how do we do that? And this goes back to that question of, right, all 50 people would like to have their course be in the core. So, I'm not going to actually make you hold hands. But I want everybody's hand in the circle. What I want to do is start by developing a shared, or as well as possible, a vision for what our goals are. What it is that, or maybe put it this way, what our values are. We need to decide what, I've said a bunch of things that, first cut things that I think might be things to pursue, right? That's not what we are going to pursue, right? That's a first cut. We need to collectively get together and decide which are the things that we care about and what are our priorities and why we think that, based on analysis, based on what we think, based on some serious research and looking at the research literature as well as our peer institutions. And with these explicit values, we can start to develop a strategic plan. A strategic plan is hard because not everyone's going to agree. And I promise you, based on the many conversations I've had and the reading I've done from our historical reports to our external reviews to our college and university strategic plan, there is pretty much no chance we're going to have a consensus, right? But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't develop our sense of what our values are and try and set our priorities, because even without a consensus, we can make progress towards those goals that we develop, knowing that not everyone's going to agree. Because if we are transparent and we've been inclusive in developing these, then at least the people that don't agree or whose first priorities aren't the collective's first priorities will understand why it is that we're doing things. And we hopefully can have some intellectual honesty and respect for what we end up choosing to do. All right. There are also we're not standing on this alone. We are at the University of Maryland. And the University of Maryland and many other people have already begun to think about these things. I'm sure you know that in 2008, the university has developed a strategic plan. If you haven't looked at it, I think you should. It's pretty interesting. There's a lot of stuff in there, but a couple of key things are interesting. One is that they starts off with some key pillars, and one of them is diversity. So I want to go back to that. I talked about women undergraduates, but I think we also have to think about our women faculty. I know many people think that this is a fine idea, and we should just have a level playing field, and we should hire women faculty when they're available. That, I would argue, is not enough. So I did some research. I looked at a bunch of competitive institutions, and I counted, or looked at the percentage of women faculty here in red, across these university computer science departments, tenure track only I looked at, and we are the lowest. And I will say I did not cherry pick. I did not look at other departments for which that were lower than us and didn't include them. I just stopped counting. The reason that the university strategic plan includes diversity is not only for equity, but it's because we are enriched by our differences. By having different perspectives, we think more broadly, and we will attract different people, we'll look at different kinds of research, we'll push each other, and I think we will do better. Two other pillars are, from the strategic plan, are entrepreneurial spirit and taking responsibility for the future. These means to tackle big issues, seize opportunities, and pursue problems of social importance. So what does this mean? And I know some people say, well, wait a second, that's not what I do. Right? I work on whatever it is, some hard technical problem, that I'm not worried about those applications. And that's fine. This goes to diversity. There's a wide range of research that we do, and we will no doubt continue forever to do deep technical research because we're a computer science department. But that's one kind of research. Another kind of research is be driven by driving problems with clients and data and people, and then figure out what are the computational problems that would support those things, support those areas. So there are different ways of doing research. I think a diverse approach is good. We already do these different kinds of things. But I think if you look at many of these other competitive universities, you will see a lot of their technical work being driven by these kinds of application areas. So my goal, in fact, my interest is not to tell anybody what to do. My goal would be to bring in opportunities and see if these are things that would be exciting to you that you would want to pursue. So one of the easy ways that I might get started would be go talk to thought leaders on campus and other departments and have them come in and give talks about the areas that they're working in and what kind of computational problems they have, and see if any of those are inspiring to you. This kind of communication, I think, is fundamental because this is something that goes beyond an individual researcher, and I think it's really the role of the chair's office to be an ambassador for the department, where an ambassador can not only communicate how great we are and tell our stories, but we can also look for collaborations, and in doing so, of course, raising money, because a fundamental part of what we need to be successful is twice as much money, actually 10 times as much money. And we can get that through gift, we can get that through creative entrepreneurial programs, which we've thought about and we can pursue. But the best way to do that is by doing great, super exciting, deep, big research projects. And doing interdisciplinary ones that are solving big social problems are an important way to do that. And part of the way we need to get there is by looking at these communications issues. So I think we need a strategic communications plan. It's great to see UMIAC's working on the website. I think CS, which I know there's some talk about it, needs to do more of this. There's lots of things we can do. We can also do things in non-traditional ways. Many of you know that I have had some personal success in communicating my own research as a as an occasional guest on Kojo Nnamdi's Tech Tuesday show. I think we need to do more of this kind of things. And I'm interested in doing more. In fact, I'm right now designing a new radio show that would be based on more computing foundations, because I think it is so fundamental to society, and I'm going to be pitching that to Kojo show soon. So with any luck, I'll have the opportunity as a way to invite many of you on, as I've already done for some of you. And of course, I couldn't do all of this myself. As I said, I think we need to have the faculty own the vision of the department. I would do a lot of things, including revitalizing the department council. I'd like to see that meet once a month and be at the forefront of designing, prioritizing, designing how we're going to be doing all of these things. I would have various associate chair positions. I'd also make a personal commitment to getting to know every single person's research. And I know this is a big job, probably will regret it. And this is one of those things where you have to call me back on later. But if I were chair, you could expect to get a call from me in the first 6 months or so to have a deep dive one-on-one meeting where you do your best to explain what it is you're doing to me and why it's exciting so that I can fulfill this ambassadorial role. And then I would start by thinking of my job as being really having continuing communications, going on road trips to both other universities and industry alike, sometimes taking some of my colleagues with me to communicate what it is that we're doing. You could expect me to have office hours so that you could come in and I'd like to hear what's going on. And I'd also hold hallway hours. I'd be much more visible, stopping in people's labs and seeing what's going on. I'd expect to have an annual State of the Department meeting where I talked about not only budgetary crises, but really think about our strategic plan and what our goals are for that year. And I'd like to think broadly about how we're going to raise money in bigger ways. We can start with simpler things like, I think, emulating the HCIL Symposium, which I've been largely and heavily involved with over the past 15 years, where we now have 300 people come in. It's great for all kinds of both connections and application and fundraising reasons, and we have a lot of fun and developed community. I want to, while doing all these things, think about the bigger picture, the bigger goals. You know, since I've been here, I've been told and been hopeful that we could have our fantastic new building, not the research module building or whatever this thing is that we have been in for some time. And space is important because, not that we may ever quite get this, but space can be highly motivating. It makes it so you want to come every day, and it's fantastic for recruiting. I have had a lot of experience myself in management, principally through the HCIL and through a company that I started. So I just want to tell you very briefly about a couple of key things for each of those. The HCIL, I have, as you know, I was director for 6 years when I was untenured when I first got here. And let me just tell you about one key decision I made, which was to develop space for the HCIL as a whole. Thinking again about this space. I wanted to keep my connections to computer science and have, but I also wanted to be working directly with my HCIL collaborators on a daily basis. So I looked for a long time to try and find space in A.V. Williams or nearby and was unable to, and eventually found 5,000 square feet of space, which we developed and renovated in Hornbake, which is real trade-offs because it means we're not here, but it's absolutely been a fantastic place to work. And I encourage you to come by and visit if you haven't. There are nooks. It's a very, very pleasant thing, very pleasant place. Zumobi, this company that I co-founded based on my research with Microsoft, it's in Seattle. We've raised $30 million of venture capital. We have 40 employees. I'm now only peripherally involved, I'm happy to say. But the point is that I've been involved in really building a community with significant stakeholders doing complex things and developing a range of products that now has just about 1 billion mobile page views per year. So they're making some real traction there as well. So I think in the end, our goals are similar. My goals, the high-level goals, are similar to what I said as our education goals. I would think as this kind of institution, we should offer the best computer science education in the world. I want faculty to own the department, not only own their research. I want this to be people feel collectively responsible for what we do, and I want the world to look at us as thought leaders in computer science. And I think that I could help us take us there, and I'd be excited to do it. So I probably used up my 30 minutes.
You did perfectly. I mean, I've never had to moderate a talk with a speaker. I did exactly what I wanted. This was great.
So thank you very much, and I guess we'll save questions for next week.
Yeah.
Okay.
And